welcome to Policing TV, where I truly am delighted to welcome Peter Sloly to the Policing TV studio. Peter, you've had a fascinating career, which I'll come on to in a moment or two. Um, we're recording this with me, the other side of the world from you. And I just want to thank you again for joining us in this in the Policing TV studio.
Thank you,
Um,
Bernard.
Quite a fascinating background. So, just looking at my notes here, you started as a professional soccer player back in 1984 for initially Toronto Blizzard and then for North York Rockets. You played, you represented Canada as a professional soccer player in the national team. You joined the Toronto Police Service and rose to the rank of Deputy Chief of Police. You then uh, moved away from uh, the police service employment to take on a role ultimately as partner at Deloitte. Many people will be entirely familiar with Deloitte as a very significant advisory firm, then returned to policing as Chief of Police of Ottawa Police. And then since then, you've set up your own consultancy, Slowly Solutions, and also moved into academia as well, both with Massey College and most recently as an adjunct professor at the University of Toronto. So I hope I've got all that right. Quite a lot there, isn't there? And in this first of what I'm hoping will be 3 videos, we're going to talk about your time leading up to your becoming the Deputy Chief of Police at Toronto Police Service. My first question, uh, you were a professional soccer player and represented your country. How did you go from that then to deciding that you were going to join the police and joining specifically Toronto Police Service?
Bernard, thanks for the question and the opportunity here to speak with you, and hopefully through you and your channel to many other police leaders who are either starting their rise in the ranks or having completed it, sharing wisdom. People listening to your description of my career path might wonder how the heck I navigated that, and sometimes I do myself. I joke I'm actually starting my 5th career, although the majority of my working life was in policing, but 5 very different experiences. I think that's sort of the person who I am. I'm very interested in a wide variety of subjects, and wherever I'm working, whether it's in professional sports or it's in professional policing, I try to bring those interests into the vocation that I find myself in. Soccer is an easy story to tell. I was a kid growing up in Jamaica, beloved of Pelé and that generation, Franz Beckenbauer and Bobby Moore, and when I came to Canada as a young kid, I took up the sport that was very new in Canada, and I excelled at it. And for a brief period, about 5 years, from about 15 years old to 20, I rose through the ranks in the national system and represented Canada internationally. And it was an injury in my 19th year to my back that started to slow me down a little bit. And eventually, like most people who aspire to those sports, very few make it and very few can stay in it. But the injury took me out of soccer. And I found myself wondering, well, what am I going to do with the rest of my life now? Because as this young man with dreams of winning the World Cup for Canada, I now had to sort of rethink what life was going to be. I'd never thought about policing, despite the fact I lived right next door to the police college for the Toronto Police Service. But one day I decided to apply to the fire department, the social services department, and the police department. And all I can tell you is the police got back to me first, and that launched a 30-year career in 2 different jurisdictions, including international peacekeeping, which I hold as the center of my life in terms of personal growth, professional accomplishment, and my ability to give back to the local community and the broader international community. So that's the long way around of saying how I got into policing.
So policing very fortunate. Well, no, policing made its own fortune by getting back to you first. In that particular instance, the Toronto Police Service, their speed of response um, meant that you subsequently, or you pretty quickly after that, you joined the Toronto Police Service. What were your expectations in those early days? I imagine that you might not have seen yourself as a future deputy chief of police there, or maybe you did. I don't know.
Yeah, no, it's a great question. This is obviously a sort of general statement, but I found in my policing career, at least back in the late '80s, early '90s when I joined, the first 5 years, no matter what your reason for joining, I found most police officers were trying to figure out whether they were going to stay, whether the expectations were being met, new opportunities were being found, whether they could handle the different difficult elements of policing, psychological, physical, emotional, spiritual. Um, and so I found myself in that position. I was good at it. I mean, I was physically strong. I was an athlete. I was, educated. I was one of the few recruits at that time that had post-secondary education, a university degree. I had strong family values and faith values. I was well prepared to be a police officer, but I wasn't prepared for the policing career, if that makes sense. And it usually takes, I find, about 3 to 5 years before I think most people get committed to it. And that was my story. My commitment was tested around my fourth and fifth year. I had seen enough policing in Toronto, which for your viewers who may not know Canada, Toronto tends to be around the third or fourth largest size municipal police service in North America. So, you have New York City, you have Los Angeles, you have Chicago, and then Toronto tends to be between Toronto and Atlanta, the largest police service. So around 5,000 police officers, 7,500 total with the civilians, and policing a city of roughly 3 to 3.5 million. So that gives you some context. So it's a big, hardworking police service that deals with a lot of issues: crime, public order, national and international events. So I enjoyed it from that standpoint. Variety of policing opportunities. What I found very difficult was what I would call the trust and confidence piece. Internally, the culture of policing can be very, very hard on people who are square pegs and round holes. And I found myself as that type of character, someone who could do the job, but I thought differently about it. I wanted to do things differently. I wanted to try things that were different. And that could rub my colleagues the wrong way. At the same time, that trust and confidence turned on the outside. And back in the 80s and 90s, Toronto and Canada was a very changing dynamic. Lots of new immigrants coming in. The city and the country was growing up. The city was becoming a world-class city. The country was becoming a stronger middle power. We wanted different things from all of our institutions, included policing. And there's a lot of changes taking place. And a lot of it was being driven by populations that were traditionally underserved and over-policed. And they were complaining about, in many cases, poor policing, too much enforcement, not enough prevention, too many deadly encounters with police and not enough encounters where people felt safe and well in their encounters with policing. And I found myself wondering whether or not this institution was the right one for me. Fast forward, I decided it was, but for this particular reason. While it was good, it needed to be better. It needed to be continuously invested in. Otherwise, it would fall further and further behind the changes taking place in society. And it would fall further and further behind the changes taking place in its own membership. People who were more diverse, more women, more visible minorities, more members of the LGBTQ community coming in and wanting to feel included, respected, and empowered, but struggling within. So it was in that context that I said, okay, I'm going to stick with this thing for the next 25 years. And it was within that context I thought, well, if I'm going to influence policing, while I can do so at the constable level, I'm probably going to have to get somewhere close to the chief constable level. And so I didn't have a particular goal to become chief of police, but I had a goal to become more influential through vertical movement, but more impactful through bringing in different elements that weren't currently in policing to improve policing over the course of time. So that's sort of the trajectory piece.
So square peg in a round hole, you mentioned there, and so you could have exited, but you decided that you would do your utmost to be a proponent of positive change, and you had clear ideas on what that positive change would be. Um, One of the things that we try to do on Policing TV and indeed on our sister publication, Policing Insight, is share areas where there is learning for others as to the experiences that those that have gone before have had. And so the question here that I have is, what learning from that time and some of the challenges that you address, some of those challenges actually being very uh, public and not just in Toronto, but also in Ottawa. What comments would you offer for those that might be experiencing similar feelings of square peg and round hole, who hopefully wants to change and want to stay and make a positive change
Hmm.
to their particular policing jurisdiction? What thoughts would you offer to them?
I'll start with the basics, and I'm sure it'll be no surprise to you, Bernard, given your career and success. I mean, you've got to look for allies. It can't be passive. If you want to succeed and thrive, not just survive in any environment, particularly large institutional cultures like policing, you're going to have to find allies. And I don't mean the current sense of allies where we create tribes and it's us versus them internally. It's the homicide team versus the frontline cops. It's the brass versus the frontline. I just mean allies who are like-minded, like-valued, but are still open to engaging in the broader institution within broader society. And I was lucky to find them. In some cases, I reached out to them. In other cases, they came and reached out to me. And thankfully, I was wise enough or maybe needy enough that I didn't reject their overtures. And I found always along, certainly in my Toronto years, the 27 years I spent there, almost at every rank, even when I got to deputy chief, there were people who were willing to invest themselves, pass on their wisdom to me, open doors, or at least point to doors that I wasn't even aware of. And I'm forever grateful for that. That's why I spend a lot of my time, even now, doing pro bono mentoring and coaching of police executives and other executives, guiding young people who are considering a career in policing or just starting out, because that's basically what underpinned my success over the years. I will say this, though, and this may be a little bit more challenging. Sometimes you just have to be plain naive. Quite frankly, if I could go back in time to any of those critical juncture points and think, okay, I'm going to stay in policing for 25 more years. If I knew how difficult that next 25 years was going to be, I probably would have said, forget it. I'm going to go earn easier money, bigger money somewhere else. So I think to a degree, naivete is a part of moving forward with a career challenge, a mission, a vision, whatever you want to call it. And then last but not least, let's say you actually do have a pretty good understanding of what you're getting into. And at different points in my career, I knew what I was stepping into, and it was a landmine. But you got to pick sort of the hill you're going to die on. Maybe too dramatic a statement, but pick your fights. But sometimes you do have to pick something that could actually end the thing that you're trying to do, but it's the right thing to do. It may actually shift the institution or create an opportunity that is once in a generation for others then to step in and actually build out. And those last two are more difficult than the allyship and mentorship I talked about. Being naive enough to actually just take that leap of faith and go for it. And then sometimes being clear-eyed enough to know that that's going to hurt. It may actually end the career, but it's the right thing to do and it's the right time to do it.
You rose through Toronto Police Service, and those interested can Google your career and find out more details. If we had more time, I would explore a number of other areas, but there's 2 points I want to raise before we come to the end of this first of three videos. First of all, to acknowledge that at age 43, you were the youngest deputy chief in the history of the Toronto Police Service. So you were clearly doing something right to rise through the ranks with that speed. But also, you mentioned very early on in this part one your pride in serving time with the United Nations. And I believe you served two tours with the United Nations Interim Administration Mission in Kosovo as a command staff officer and indeed the Canadian contingent commander. Before we move on to other aspects of your career, let me just invite you to say something about that. And what was it that about that part of your career that led you to speak with such pride very early on in this first video about that experience?
Well, Bernard, no hesitation. Singularly, that was the greatest experience in my working life, and outside of my children and my family, the greatest experience in my personal life. A great lesson from it. I was given basically 24 hours to decide by my chief of police then, Julian Fantino, whether or not I would take this position. It was a very rarely offered position to a municipal police officer. And I quickly phoned all of my family, all of my mentors, all of my friends, and every one of them said, "Don't do it, Peter. You're literally about to break through into the senior ranks. You've had such a wonderful run. Why would you take yourself out of the country, out of the picture, and into danger? It makes no sense." But I did it anyway. I knew somewhere deep down in my heart, in my gut, that this was something I needed to do, I wanted to do, and I would benefit from. And there's no guarantees from that. But it all worked out that way. I traveled around the world in ways that I would never be able to do again. I met people that I would never be able to come across. I developed mentors and allies that I would never have come across. And ultimately, it led to meeting my wife and starting my family. So singularly, from a professional standpoint and a personal standpoint, the best adventure and the best investment I've ever made outside of starting my own family. So many of the lessons I learned, I worked with 54 different police services within that two-tour opportunity. I worked with national security agencies, military agencies, all of which became critically important later on in my career as a police officer, in my time with Deloitte, and in my current role as a private consultant. So I just can't say enough about it. I've seen others come back from those assignments broken, bent, twisted, angry, hurt, PTSD. So I'm not saying it's for everybody, and I'm not saying it always works out in the way that it worked out for me, but certainly the way it worked out for me was singularly the best thing I ever did.
Well, let's move on very shortly to your stepping away from policing and moving to Deloitte and then coming back into policing. Actually, with Deloitte, you didn't step away from policing, you just had a different perspective on
Yes.
policing. But what I am going to do, Peter, is to bring this first video to a close. We're going to move on to um, a discussion of your time with Deloitte and then return into the public sector. Sorry, yes, the public sector in policing in video two, and then look beyond that in video three. But Peter Sloly, fascinating first some 15 minutes or so conversation with you. We'll bring this first video to a close. And just a reminder to those watching, if you're watching on YouTube, do please press that subscribe button, do comment in the video, and do watch the second and third videos that Peter and I are about to record. So for the time being, Peter, thank you very much indeed.
Thanks, Bernard.